Now let us come to the methodology of a research study. In a typical thesis or dissertations, the methodology are normally in chapter 3, which is after the introductions and literature review. As for the journals or conference papers, the methodology will come after the introductions. The methodology is very important as it provides descriptions on how the research was carried out, giving details regarding the methods used in the research, and it is typically written in the passive voice. This chapter should be explained in precise manner, provided with sufficient information and details, not only on the testing program, as well as the specifications of the materials being used, and also the entire research design in terms of the flow and the interrelationship between different stages for a research study. You need to provide adequate information for the reader to be able to repeat or replicate the word if it is needed. You can consider these sections for this methodology as a guide for the researcher who are using similar methods to conduct their research study. The methodology provides the information regarding the research design. It also specifies the experimental design, theoretical or modeling descriptions, depending on the nature of the research study, whether it is an experimental study or analytical study or modeling study. You need to provide adequate details and specifications for all the materials, hardware, and software that you use. In the case that those details are made up of some assumptions, especially in the case that you carry out your research in terms of the computer simulations, those assumptions as well as the assumed value need to be clearly stated. These chapters need to be written in the clear and concise manner, not only providing required details, the proper sequence and precautions, as well as the standard testing procedure should also be disclosed. In the case that you are referring to some standards in carrying out some experimental study, the relevant standards needs to be clearly specified. The diagram here shows an example how you plan a research study. You know that a typical research, it will be on basis of some problem, where the entire purpose of the research is to resolve the problem. You can have one problem in general. Out of that particular problem, you may break down the problem into sub-problems. Let's say now in this case, you have 3 sub-problems. Sub-problem 1, 2, and 3. You also know that a research is carried out in order to resolve a problem. There is a purpose for that. Research is purpose-driven. Therefore, a typical research will have objectives. There will be clearly defined objectives, and typically, the objectives are meant to resolve each of the sub-problems. If you have 3 sub-problems, you should theoretically have 3 objectives. You will need to demonstrate that the importance of having those objectives. What will be the significance or the impacts or the gain that we can acquire upon achieving of those objectives. And then what you see that is that the objective will govern how the research is being carried out. Everything in the following will be governed by the objective, while the objectives are meant to resolve the sub-problems. You will have to look into your objective and then define the scope within the objective. Same goes to the objective 2 and objective 3. This will lead to your next step, which is your methodology. Theoretically, every objective will be supported by a methodology. You can consider this as the stages of your study. At the first stage, you resolve the first objective. At the second stage, you resolve the second objective, and the next stage, it will be the third objective. This leads to 3 stages of methodology. The methodology here is referring to some sort of testing program or investigating program which later require analysis. Each stages will involve analysis. This will give you analysis 1, analysis 2, and analysis 3. And then based on the analysis outcome, you do discussions, acquiring the findings, and then draw the conclusions. So later in your final chapter of your thesis, your conclusion should theoretically be structured into 3 parts. Each part will answer to each of the objectives. Therefore, you will expect 3 parts of the objective as the outcome of your entire research. This represents the simplest models how your research can be carried out. And theoretically, you should structure your entire thesis into this structure, where there will be explicit objective 1, 2, and 3, followed up by the relevant analysis and methodology, and then end up with the conclusions answering to the objectives. Of course, you can design your research to be much more complex. As you can see from the model here, it is 1-to-1 model. You may also go for 1-to-many model or many-to-one model. For example, you can have one problem being resolved by 2 objectives. This is a typical 1-to-many model. Or you may have 2 objectives resolving to 1 methodology as a typical many-to-one model. However, normally I would not recommend that due to the complexity in terms of the 1-to-many and many-to-one model. Why is it so? Let's say now you take this as 1-to-1 model. You know that you have 1, 2, 3 subproblems. For you to be able to resolve all these 3 subproblems, your major problem or your main problem should technically be resolved. This is provided when all 3 are being resolved. And then you put your research focus into 3 main objectives. Each of the objectives is to resolve one of the subproblems. Having those objectives being identified, there should be a series of methodology to resolve each of the objectives here. And then from the analysis, you are able to acquire findings and draw conclusions. The conclusions is answering to your objective. Then at the conclusion stage, you know that the objective 1 has been resolved. Theoretically, resolving objective 1 should lead to resolving the problem 1. And if you're able to resolve all 3 objectives here, you know that all 3 subproblems has been resolved. Then your ultimate goal of your research is achieved. Let's say now you are using 1-to-many model or many-to-one model. Taking this as an example, you have one problem which needs to be resolved by 2 objectives. And then at the end of the day, you realize that your objective 1 is fulfilled, but your objective 2 is not fulfilled. Then how will you know that your problem 1 is resolved? seems that you have objective 1 fulfilled and objective 2 not fulfilled. How do you quantify the significance or the influence by each of the objective? Will objective 1 giving more influential impact to problem 1? Or is it objective 2 going to give you more impact for you to decide whether the problem is resolved? Then you will reach to a dilemma, starting to quantify the impacts of each objective, which I feel this is rather complex, as it is quite subjective for you to do so, and this is going to bring a lot of argument between you and your examiner. Therefore, the easiest way for you to do your research planning is that you do everything one-to-one. You will be able to explicitly decide which problem you have resolved. There is one more thing that you need to know about this, is that when you put everything in the objective, which are typically 2 to 3 objectives, sometimes if you wish to accomplish more, you may reach up to a maximum of 4. You need to know that the objective is not just a statement claiming what you intend to achieve. An objective is always accompanied with a series of methodology, analysis, and conclusions. The most ideal conditions for the objective. Let's say now you have 3 objectives. Your research work for each objective should be somewhere about 1/3, 1/3, and 1/3 of your entire research work. Sometimes you are unable to equally divide them. Slight variations may be applied. For example, your research work on objective 1 constitute 20%, and then your objective 2 and objective 3 constitute 40%. In total, it will be 100% of your works. This is still okay. The point that I'm making now is that the objective, when you put it into a statement, it is a big deal in your research. It should be accompanied with a systematic series of methods, analysis, and conclusions. And there will be significance and clearly defined scopes. It is not just a statement which you can simply claim without explicitly supported by equivalent series of works done within your research program. You may also arrange your objective in sequence, which we normally do that, so that we can arrange our methodology in sequence. During the first step, we are able to resolve objective 1, and then going for the second stage, we are able to resolve objective 3, and then we go for the third stage, we are able to resolve objective 3. Of course, it may not necessarily be in linear method. You can have objective 1 as the preliminary study, and then objective 2 and 3 at the same level, covering different scopes. However, when you do everything together, it leads to a complete research study. This is also doable. Therefore, normally as an examiner, when I evaluate a thesis, when I see the numbers of the objective, I will need to look into their research methodology, their analysis, and how they construct their conclusions, whether they have explicitly conducted a systematic study in order to attain each of the objectives. And this is the main reason that most of your supervisor will tell you that not to have the numbers of the objective more than 4. It is more often you see the objective in the range of 2 and 3. If you found yourself constructing your objective of your research study 5, 6, or 7 objectives, most likely you are not in the right direction, and you do not aware that the significance of the objective in your research study. These are several descriptions for the stages of your research. where when you define the problem needs to be valid. When you define the objectives, it should be SMART objective. The meaning of SMART objectives are they must be specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bounded. And this objective needs to be achievable. You also need to make sure that there is a strong correlation between your objective and the problem. The correlations must be so strong that resolving objective 1 will be equivalent to resolving your problem 1. You should try your best to achieve that level. As for the significance of the study, it needs to be impactful and it should be important. In terms of the scope, it should be adequate, covering the breadth and depth, and the scope must be relevant. As for the methods carried out to accomplish the objectives, your method should be systematic, rigorous, and in line with the objectives. As for the analysis, it needs to be thorough, and you need to have correct interpretations of the results and data. And for your conclusions, you will need to answer to your objectives. This will be the simplest model, which is highly recommended to you, which is 1-to-1 model, in order to minimize the overlapping and the redundancy. You should cover adequate breadth and depth, and your entire research study needs to be justified.